On a cold December day in Minsk, the city's streets were blanketed in snow, their quiet beauty belying the tension simmering beneath the surface. In the heart of Belarus's capital, a meeting was about to unfold that would capture the attention of diplomats and analysts around the world. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko greeted U.S. envoy John Coale, a scene unimaginable just years ago, when relations between the two countries were at their lowest point. The handshake between these two men, once separated by a chasm of mistrust, was more than a simple gesture. It was a signal that something fundamental was shifting. Their handshake, broadcast by state media to millions, hinted at a possible thaw in a relationship that had been frozen for decades. Cameras flashed, and the world watched as the two leaders exchanged carefully measured words, each aware of the stakes involved. Coale's urgent mission was clear. He was there to negotiate the release of hundreds of political prisoners, men and women whose fates had become a symbol of the country's struggle for freedom and reform. The negotiation table was set, documents stacked high, and the flags of both nations standing side by side, a rare sight in Minsk. This meeting, a continuation of earlier, more tentative talks, marked a significant shift in Eastern European diplomacy. For years, Belarus had been isolated, its government criticized for human rights abuses and its close ties to Moscow. Now, the possibility of dialogue was on the table, and the stakes could not have been higher. For years, Lukashenko was shunned by the West for his authoritarian rule and unwavering support for Russia. Western governments imposed sanctions, and protests erupted in cities across Europe, demanding change in Belarus. Lukashenko's image as Europe's last dictator seemed unshakable. Now, the Trump administration was testing a new approach: direct engagement over isolation. American officials believed that opening a channel of communication, however fragile, might yield more progress than years of silence and sanctions. It was a gamble, but one they hoped would pay off. The world watched closely, with journalists and analysts debating whether this was the beginning of genuine reform or simply a calculated move by Lukashenko to win relief from crippling sanctions. Headlines speculated about the future of Belarus, and experts weighed in on the risks and rewards of this new diplomatic gamble. The outcome of these talks would shape not only the fate of over 1,000 political prisoners, but also the future of Belarus and the balance of power in the region. As the doors closed behind the negotiators, the world held its breath, waiting to see if this high-stakes diplomatic dance would lead to real change, or yet another disappointment. John Coale isn't a career diplomat. He's a trial lawyer, a man more at home in the courtroom than in the corridors of international power. Known for his sharp legal mind and relentless pursuit of results, Coale has built a reputation as someone who doesn't back down from a challenge. He's argued high-profile cases, navigated complex negotiations, and made a name for himself as a fixer, someone who gets things done, no matter how tough the odds. That's exactly why President Trump hand-picked him for this delicate mission. Trump, famous for his unconventional choices, saw in Coale a kindred spirit, someone who values results over protocol, and who isn't afraid to break with tradition if it means getting a deal across the finish line. Coale's appointment is a clear signal. The Trump administration prefers outsiders who can cut through layers of bureaucracy and red tape. In a world where diplomatic negotiations often drag on for months or even years, Trump wants people who can move fast and deliver tangible outcomes. On his very first visit to Belarus in September 2025, Coale made headlines by securing the release of 52 political prisoners. For the families waiting anxiously at home, it was a moment of relief and hope. For the international community, it was a sign that the U.S. was willing to use its leverage to push for real change. But this breakthrough didn't come for free. In exchange, the U.S. agreed to lift sanctions on Belarus's national airline, a move that would help the country's struggling economy and open up new opportunities for travel and trade. This is transactional diplomacy at its core, a classic quid pro quo that has become a hallmark of Trump's foreign policy. Deals are made not just for the sake of diplomacy, but to achieve specific, measurable goals. The stakes are clear. The U.S. wants to see prisoners freed and human rights respected, while Belarus is desperate for economic relief and international legitimacy. Each side is holding out for what matters most to them. For Coale, the challenge is immense. He must broker a deal that not only satisfies both governments, but also addresses the ongoing human rights crisis in Belarus. The world is watching to see if he can balance these competing demands and deliver a solution that lasts. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, long known for his authoritarian rule, sees Coale as a direct line to President Trump. By embracing this new diplomatic channel, Lukashenko hopes to secure concessions that have eluded him in the past. The negotiations are tense, and the outcome is far from certain. Can Coale broker a lasting agreement that brings real change, or will this be just another temporary fix in a long history of failed talks? The risks are high, and the consequences will be felt far beyond the negotiating table. As the world's eyes turn to Minsk and Washington, one thing is clear. This time, everyone is waiting for results, not just more rhetoric. At the heart of these talks are real people, opposition leaders, activists, journalists, imprisoned for daring to dissent. Their only crime, speaking out against injustice, demanding free elections, and standing up for basic human rights. In Belarus, voicing an opinion or joining a peaceful protest can mean years behind bars, separation from loved ones, and a future clouded by uncertainty. These prisoners are not just statistics. They are mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, and friends whose lives have been upended by a regime intolerant of criticism. Human rights groups estimate that between 1,200 and 1,400 political prisoners are currently held in Belarusian jails. Each name on these lists represents a story of courage and sacrifice. International organizations and local activists work tirelessly to document abuses, raise awareness, and advocate for their release, but the numbers continue to grow as new arrests are made. Conditions inside these prisons are notoriously harsh. Overcrowded cells, inadequate food, poor medical care, and fabricated charges are the norm. Many detainees are denied access to lawyers or visits from family. Reports of psychological pressure, intimidation, and even torture are common, making survival a daily struggle. Among the most high-profile detainees are Nobel Peace Prize laureate Alice Bialyatsky, a symbol of the human rights movement, and protest leader Maria Kolesnikova, whose defiance inspired thousands. Their courage in the face of repression has drawn international attention, but countless lesser-known prisoners remain in the shadows, their stories untold. The current negotiations may lead to the release of 152 prisoners, a glimmer of hope for some families. Yet, this is only a fraction of those unjustly held. For every person freed, many more remain behind bars, waiting for justice and freedom. For families, every update from Minsk is a mix of hope and anxiety. They wait by their phones, desperate for news, clinging to the possibility of reunion, but fearing disappointment. The emotional toll is immense, as days turn into weeks and months of uncertainty. The true measure of success is not just in the numbers, but in the moments when prison gates open and families are finally reunited. Each embrace outside the prison walls is a testament to resilience and hope, a small victory against a backdrop of ongoing repression. Each release is a victory, a moment of joy and relief, but the crisis remains vast. The struggle for freedom and justice in Belarus is far from over, and the need for international solidarity has never been greater. The world must not forget those still behind bars. Their fight is not just for themselves, but for the future of Belarus, a future where no one is imprisoned for their beliefs, and where justice and dignity prevail. To grasp these talks, consider the tangled history between the US, Belarus, and Russia. Lukashenko long balanced East and West, but post-2020 protests and crackdowns pushed him into Moscow's arms. Belarus became a launchpad for Russia's Ukraine invasion, deepening its isolation. Hosting Russian nuclear weapons cemented Lukashenko's alliance with Putin. Now, Minsk's outreach to Washington signals a bid for autonomy and economic relief. For the US, even a slight shift away from Moscow is a strategic win. Transactional diplomacy, focused on prisoner releases, could subtly reshape Eastern Europe's map. Both sides are gambling. Lukashenko for survival, the US for influence. The outcome could ripple far beyond Belarus. The stakes are geopolitical as much as humanitarian. Human rights groups warn of a revolving door. Prisoners freed for concessions, then new arrests fill the cells. After the September deal, 167 new political prisoners were documented. The case of Mykola Statkevich, freed and then rearrested, shows the regime's tactics. Opposition leader Svietlana Tsikhanouskaya urges the West, don't trust Lukashenko's promises. She calls for strict verification and consequences for backsliding. Without real change, releases are just temporary headlines. The challenge: break the cycle, not just negotiate its terms. Lukashenko, ever the showman, publicly praises Trump and frames the talks as a partnership. Yet, he also questions why he should free those he calls criminals, playing both sides for maximum leverage. Trump, meanwhile, calls the prisoners hostages, casting the negotiations as a rescue mission. This framing appeals to American audiences and simplifies the stakes. For Trump, freeing prisoners is a clear, marketable win. Both leaders use public statements to shape perceptions at home and abroad. The rhetoric is strategic, not just personal. The real test is whether words translate into lasting change. For Lukashenko, these talks are about economic survival and regaining leverage with Russia. Sanctions have crippled Belarus's economy. Prisoner releases are his bargaining chip. He hopes to show Moscow he has options, and the West that he's not beyond reach. For the US, a mass release would be a humanitarian and diplomatic victory. It would validate Trump's direct, transactional approach. Strategically, even a small wedge between Minsk and Moscow is a win. The outcome could set a precedent for US engagement with other authoritarian states. This is more than a Belarus story. It's a test of a new diplomatic doctrine. The Minsk talks are under global scrutiny, from Moscow to Brussels to Beijing. European allies worry a US deal could fracture transatlantic unity if it eases pressure on Lukashenko. Russia fears losing influence over Belarus, its key ally and military partner. Ukraine, still threatened from the north, wants guarantees that Belarus won't aid future aggression. A deal focused only on prisoners risks emboldening the regime without real reform. If successful, this approach could reshape how the US deals with autocrats worldwide. The precedent: can human rights be traded for economic relief? The world is watching for both the risks and the results. The Minsk negotiations offer hope for hundreds, but risks remain. The best outcome: a large, lasting release, with no rearrests or forced exiles. The worst: a symbolic gesture, followed by renewed repression. Human rights advocates urge vigilance. Freedom must be real and lasting. The true test is what happens after the headlines fade. Will Belarus's prisons empty for good, or will the cycle continue? The world must keep watching, demanding not just deals, but genuine freedom.